The phone call came at 3 in the morning. That's how death announces itself, isn't it? Never during business hours, never when you're prepared. Just the shrill ring cutting through silence, pulling you from dreams into the harsh, fluorescent reality of loss. My grandfather was gone. Colonel William Hayes, United States Marine Corps, retired. 82 years old, found peacefully in his sleep by the neighbor who checked on him every Tuesday morning. The funeral arrangements were already made, the lawyer said. Everything handled with military precision, just like the old man would have wanted. I stood in my kitchen, still in my pajamas, staring at the coffee maker that hadn't started brewing yet. The house felt different somehow, like the air had changed density. Grandpa was the last link to a generation that understood duty without question, sacrifice without complaint. Now that chain was broken. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect for a career Marine. Honor guard, flag folding, the haunting melody of taps echoing across Arlington National Cemetery. Men in their 70s stood straighter than soldiers half their age, saluting a casket draped in red, white, and blue. I watched my father shake hands with people whose names carried weight in Washington, his smile practiced and political. But something felt hollow about the whole ceremony. Not the military honors, those were perfect. It was the eulogies. The way people talked about Grandpa, like they were reading from his personnel file. Distinguished service, exemplary leadership, dedication to country. All true, but incomplete somehow. Like they were describing a statue, instead of the man who taught me to change oil when I was 12. After the cemetery, we gathered at his house in Arlington. The same modest ranch where he'd lived for 30 years, where the walls were covered with photographs of Marines he'd served with, not the politicians he could have courted. My father moved through the rooms like a real estate appraiser, already calculating square footage and market value. That's when the lawyer pulled me aside. Margaret Chen, attorney at law, with kind eyes and a briefcase that had seen better days. She handed me an envelope with my name written in Grandpa's careful penmanship. He was very specific about this, she said quietly. To be opened only by you, only after the service. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Grandpa used for important correspondence. His handwriting was steady despite his age, each letter formed with the precision of a man who believed words mattered. Sarah, the note began, if you're reading this, it means the old Marine finally shipped out for his final deployment. I know this day would come eventually, but that doesn't make it any easier to write these words. There are things I never told you, things I couldn't tell you while I was still breathing. But death has a way of making cowards brave. This key opens something more valuable than money or property. It opens truth. Take it to my garage. Look for the blue tarp in the corner. What you find there will explain everything I couldn't say while I was alive. The letter was signed simply, Semper Fi, Grandpa. I folded the note carefully, my hands trembling slightly. Around me, relatives discussed funeral flowers and casserole dishes, their voices blending into white noise. Nobody noticed when I slipped out the back door. The garage smelled like motor oil and old newspapers, exactly the way it had when I was a kid, helping Grandpa rebuild carburetors on Saturday mornings. Tools hung in perfect order on pegboard walls, each one outlined in black marker so you'd know exactly where it belonged. Even in death, his world remained squared away. The blue tarp was exactly where he said it would be, draped over something large in the corner. I pulled it away and stepped back in surprise. Underneath sat a pristine 1967 Mustang Fastback, cherry red with white racing stripes. The chrome bumpers gleamed like mirrors, the paint job flawless. This wasn't the rusted hulk I remembered from childhood visits. This was a showroom quality restoration, the kind that cost more than most people's annual salary. I ran my fingers along the hood, feeling the smooth perfection of bodywork that had taken hundreds of hours to complete. The key fit perfectly in the door lock. Inside, the black leather seats were immaculate, the dashboard restored to factory specifications. But something was different. Modern additions had been seamlessly integrated into the classic interior. A GPS navigation system was mounted where the original radio should have been, its screen dark but somehow expectant. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine came alive with a rumble that made my chest vibrate, 8 cylinders of American muscle responding instantly. The GPS screen flickered to life, displaying a single saved destination. Home, it read. Not an address, not coordinates. Just that one word, pulsing softly like a heartbeat. I stared at the screen, confusion mixing with curiosity. This house had been Grandpa's home for 3 decades. Why would he program his GPS to somewhere else? I pressed the navigation button, and a route appeared on the screen. The destination was 4 hours away, deep in the Virginia mountains, in a county I'd never heard of. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Where did you go? We need to discuss the estate." I typed back quickly. "Took a walk, back soon." Then I turned off the phone and shifted the Mustang into drive. The decision to follow that GPS felt less like choice and more like gravity. Grandpa had spent his entire life being deliberate, purposeful. He didn't restore classic cars for hobby projects. He didn't install modern navigation systems for convenience. Everything he did served a mission, even if that mission wasn't immediately apparent. The Mustang handled the highway like it was built yesterday, suspension tight, steering responsive. Whatever Grandpa had done during the restoration, he'd spared no expense. I found myself driving faster than I intended, drawn forward by questions that multiplied with every mile. The radio crackled to life without my touching anything. Not music, but a recording. Grandpa's voice filled the car, clear and strong, like he was sitting in the passenger seat. "Sarah, if you're hearing this, it means you found the car and you're following the GPS. Good. I always knew you had more curiosity than sense, just like your grandmother. What you're about to discover will change everything you think you know about me, about our family, about the choices I made after the war." The recording paused, filled with the sound of his breathing, the weight of unspoken secrets. I spent 40 years keeping this from everyone, including you, maybe especially you. But secrets have a way of eating a man alive from the inside. By the time you hear this, I'll be beyond the reach of consequences. The only thing left is truth. Static filled the speakers for a moment. Then his voice returned, softer now, tinged with something that might have been regret. "The GPS will take you to a place that doesn't exist on any official map. A place I built with my own hands, with money that officially never existed, for people the government pretended to forget. What I'm about to show you is my real legacy, not the medals gathering dust on my wall." The recording ended abruptly, leaving me alone with the rumble of the engine and 1,000 new questions. I glanced at the GPS. Still 2 hours to destination, 2 hours to prepare for revelations I couldn't imagine. Outside the windows, Virginia countryside rolled past in autumn colors, gold and red leaves carpeting the roadside. The further I drove from Arlington, the more isolated the landscape became. Small towns gave way to farmland, farmland to forest, civilization gradually thinning until I felt like I was driving backward through time. The GPS guided me off the interstate onto progressively smaller roads, each turn taking me deeper into mountains that seemed to swallow the afternoon light. By the time I reached the final turn, shadows were lengthening, and the air through the open windows carried the sharp scent of pine and wood smoke. The road ahead curved sharply to the right, disappearing behind a stand of old-growth trees. According to the GPS, I was less than a mile from my destination, from whatever secret Grandpa had spent 4 decades protecting. I downshifted and followed the curve, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear in equal measure. Whatever waited ahead would redefine everything I thought I knew about the man who'd raised me to believe in honor, duty, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths. The Mustang's engine echoed off the mountainsides as I drove toward answers I wasn't sure I was ready to find. The road narrowed to a single lane, gravel crunching under the Mustang's tires as I navigated between towering oaks that must have been standing when my grandfather was born. The GPS showed I was close now, maybe half a mile from whatever destination he'd programmed into this machine. My palms were slick against the steering wheel, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. Then I saw it, a gate. Not the kind you'd expect on a mountain road, but something substantial. Wrought iron, painted forest green, maybe 12 feet high, stretching between stone pillars that looked like they'd been quarried from the mountain itself. No signs, no mailbox, nothing to indicate what lay beyond. Just that imposing barrier and a small keypad mounted on the left pillar. I pulled up to the gate and rolled down the window. The air was different here, thinner somehow, carrying scents of cedar and something else I couldn't identify. Old smoke maybe, or the lingering ghost of campfires that had burned years ago. The keypad glowed softly in the fading light, waiting. My grandfather's voice crackled through the radio again, like he'd been watching, waiting for this exact moment. "The code is your grandmother's birthday," he said simply. "Month, day, year. She always said secrets should be protected by love, not fear." November the 15th, 1928. I punched in the numbers, 11:15:28. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the gate shuddered and began to swing open with surprising silence, revealing a paved driveway that disappeared into the forest. I drove through, and the gate closed behind me with a soft click that sounded disturbingly final. The driveway curved gently upward, following the natural contours of the mountain. Mature landscaping lined both sides. Not the wild overgrowth you'd expect in these remote hills, but carefully planned gardens that had been tended for decades. Someone had spent serious money and serious time creating this place. The trees opened suddenly, and I found myself in a clearing that took my breath away. Before me stood a house that belonged in the pages of Architectural Digest, not hidden in the Virginia mountains. 2 stories of native stone and timber with a wraparound porch that commanded a view of the valley below. Warm light glowed from every window, as if someone had been expecting me. But it was what surrounded the house that made me forget to breathe. Outbuildings dotted the property like a small village. A workshop larger than most suburban homes. What looked like a dormitory or bunkhouse. A building that could only be described as a medical facility, complete with the distinctive red cross painted on its side. And beyond them all, barely visible in the gathering dusk, the outline of what appeared to be an obstacle course carved into the mountainside. I parked the Mustang in a circular driveway and sat for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't a vacation home or hunting lodge. This was a compound, a facility designed for some specific purpose that my grandfather had never mentioned in 40 years of family dinners and holiday visits. The front door opened before I could decide whether to knock. A woman emerged, maybe 60 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the kind of posture that suggested military training. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, but something in the way she carried herself screamed command authority. "You must be Sarah," she said, walking towards me with confident strides. "I'm Colonel Patricia Mason, retired. Your grandfather told me you'd be coming eventually, though I'll admit I expected it might take longer after the funeral." I climbed out of the Mustang on unsteady legs. "I'm sorry, but I have no idea what's going on here. Grandpa left me a key and a GPS coordinate. I followed it, but I don't understand what this place is." Colonel Mason smiled, but there was something sad in her expression. "No, I don't suppose you would. William was very careful about operational security, even with family. Come inside. There's coffee on, and you're going to need it for what I have to tell you." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. Rich hardwood floors, stone fireplaces, furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. But what caught my attention were the photographs covering every available wall space. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Men and women in military uniforms, some formal portraits, others candid shots that looked like they'd been taken in combat zones. "Recognize anyone?" Colonel Mason asked, following my gaze. I studied the faces more carefully. Some were familiar, though I couldn't place them immediately. Others were complete strangers. But they all shared something indefinable, a look in their eyes that spoke of experiences most people would never understand. "These are all veterans," I said finally. "Not just any veterans," Mason replied. "These are people who came here when they had nowhere else to go. People the system failed. People who fell through cracks so wide they might as well have been canyons. Your grandfather built this place to catch them." She led me into a comfortable sitting room where a fire crackled in a massive stone hearth. The coffee was strong and black, exactly the way Grandpa had always preferred it. Mason settled into a leather chair across from me, her expression serious. "Sarah, what I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change how you think about your grandfather. Are you prepared for that?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure I meant it. After Vietnam, William came home to a country that didn't want to hear about what he'd seen, what he'd done, what had been done to him and his men. The government provided basic medical care, some educational benefits, but nothing for the deeper wounds. The invisible injuries that destroyed marriages, ended careers, drove good men to drink themselves to death or worse. She paused to sip her coffee, her eyes focused somewhere beyond the window. William refused to accept that. He used his connections, his reputation, and eventually his personal fortune to create something that officially didn't exist. A place where veterans could come to heal, to train, to find purpose again. Not just the physical rehabilitation the VA provided, but genuine restoration of the human spirit. The implications began to sink in. He funded all this himself? Initially, yes. Later, he found other donors, people who understood what he was trying to accomplish. But it had to remain completely off the books. No government oversight, no bureaucratic interference, no politicians deciding who deserved help based on budget considerations or public opinion polls. Mason stood and walked to a wall covered with what looked like mission patches and unit insignia. Over the past 30 years, more than 300 veterans have called this place home. Some for weeks, some for years. We've prevented 17 confirmed suicides, helped dozens overcome addiction, and sent trained, functional human beings back into the world to build meaningful lives. My head was spinning. But why keep it secret from family? From me? Because the moment this place became public knowledge, it would cease to exist. Government regulators would shut it down for operating without proper permits. Insurance companies would demand impossible premiums. And most importantly, the veterans who needed help would stop coming because they'd lost the one thing that made this place special: complete privacy and anonymity. She turned back to face me, her expression grave. "Sarah, your grandfather didn't just leave you a car and a GPS coordinate. He left you the most important decision you'll ever make. This place is now yours, legally and morally. The question is, what are you going to do with it?" The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. I thought about my comfortable life back in Arlington, my job at the marketing firm, my apartment with its view of the Potomac. Simple, predictable, safe. Then I thought about the faces in those photographs, the men and women who'd found salvation in these mountains because one old Marine refused to let them fall through the cracks. I thought about my grandfather, who'd lived a double life for 3 decades, pouring his heart and soul and fortune into something the world would never know about or thank him for. "Show me everything," I said quietly. "I need to understand what he built before I can decide what to do with it." Colonel Mason smiled, and for the first time since I'd arrived, it reached her eyes. "That's exactly what he said you'd say. Come on, we'll start with the workshop. That's where most of the magic happens." As we walked back outside into the mountain evening, I realized my life had just been divided into before and after. Before I knew about this place, and after. There was no going back to ignorance, no pretending I'd never seen what my grandfather had hidden in these hills. The question now was whether I had the courage to carry forward what he'd started, or whether his life's work would die with him in Arlington National Cemetery. The workshop was larger than my childhood home, with concrete floors polished to a mirror shine and overhead lights that could have illuminated a surgical theater. But what stopped me cold wasn't the size or the brightness. It was the precision of everything inside. Workbenches lined the walls, each one equipped with tools I recognized and dozens I didn't. Lathes, mills, welding stations, electronics benches with oscilloscopes, and soldering equipment that looked like it belonged in a NASA laboratory. Every tool had its place, outlined in white paint on red pegboard. The kind of organization that spoke of military discipline carried into civilian life. Your grandfather believed in teaching practical skills, Mason explained, running her hand along one of the workbenches. Men who came here broken, convinced they were worthless, would spend months in this shop learning to build things with their hands again. Furniture, electronics, even vehicles. There's something powerful about creating when you've spent years focused on destruction. I picked up a wooden jewelry box from one of the benches, its surfaces sanded smooth as silk and joints fitted with the precision of a Swiss watch. A small brass nameplate read, "Made by Sergeant David Chen, Class of 2019. Where is he now? I asked. Teaching high school shop class in Montana, married last year. His wife sent us pictures from the wedding. Mason's voice carried the quiet pride of someone who'd watched miracles happen in this room. David came here after 3 suicide attempts. Couldn't hold a job, couldn't sleep, couldn't see any reason to keep breathing. 6 months later, he walked out of here with a purpose. We moved through the workshop slowly, Mason explaining the function of each area. The metalworking section, where veterans learned welding and fabrication. The electronics lab, where they built radios and computers from components. The automotive bay, where they restored classic cars, just like the Mustang that had brought me here. Was my car restored here? I asked. Mason nodded. Your grandfather worked on it himself, mostly at night when he couldn't sleep. Said it reminded him of your grandmother's first car, the one she drove when they were dating. He spent 2 years getting every detail perfect. That explained the flawless restoration, the modern navigation system seamlessly integrated with period-correct components. Grandpa had poured his heart into that car, knowing someday it would lead me to this place, to these revelations that were reshaping everything I thought I knew about him. We left the workshop and walked toward the medical facility. The building was smaller, but no less impressive, with examination rooms, a surgical suite, and what looked like a physical therapy center, complete with parallel bars and exercise equipment. We had a full-time doctor until 2 years ago, Mason explained. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, former Army surgeon. She retired to Florida, but we still have a nurse practitioner and 2 physical therapists on staff. Most of our residents come here with injuries, visible and invisible. Through the windows, I could see into a room lined with comfortable chairs, arranged in a circle. A therapy group setting, the kind of place where hard men learn to speak about unspeakable things. The VA does good work, Mason continued, but they're overwhelmed and underfunded. By the time most of our people find us, they've been shuffled through the system for years, without getting the help they really need. Here, we can take the time necessary for genuine healing. The dormitory was our next stop. From the outside, it looked like a luxury hotel, all natural stone and timber construction that blended seamlessly with the mountain environment. Inside, it was more like a well-appointed college residence hall. Private rooms, each with its own bathroom, common areas, with comfortable furniture and large-screen televisions. A commercial kitchen where residents could prepare their own meals. How many people live here now? I asked. 18 currently. We can house up to 30 comfortably, 40 in an emergency. The average stay is about 6 months, though we've had people here as long as 3 years and as short as 3 weeks. Everyone's timeline is different. She showed me the common room where a group of men were playing cards around a poker table. They looked up as we entered, offering polite nods but not interrupting their game. These weren't the broken, homeless veterans I might have expected. They looked healthy, engaged, purposeful. Most people have misconceptions about PTSD and veteran homelessness, Mason said quietly as we walked back outside. They imagine dirty, unstable individuals who can't function in society. The reality is much more complex. These are often highly intelligent, skilled professionals who simply need time and space to process experiences that would break most civilians. The obstacle course was our final destination, carved into the mountainside with the same attention to detail I'd seen everywhere else on the property. Rope climbs, wall traversals, balance beams, and challenges I couldn't immediately identify. But this wasn't about physical fitness alone. We call it the confidence course, Mason explained. It's designed to help people remember their own capability, their own strength. When you've been told by doctors and bureaucrats that you're disabled, broken, unemployable, sometimes you need to climb a 30-foot wall to remember that those labels don't define you. We climbed to an observation platform that offered a view of the entire facility. From this height, I could see the careful planning that had gone into every building, every pathway, every landscaped area. This wasn't just a retreat center or a rehabilitation facility. It was a complete ecosystem designed to rebuild human beings from the ground up. Your grandfather spent 40 years perfecting this place, Mason said. Every building, every program, every detail was tested and refined based on what actually worked for the people who came here. This represents the most comprehensive private veteran rehabilitation program in the country, maybe the world. The sun had set completely now, and lights were coming on throughout the facility. Warm yellow glows from dormitory windows, bright white illumination from the workshop, the soft blue glow of the medical facility's night lighting. It looked like a small town nestled in these mountains, a community built around the simple idea that no veteran should be left behind. Sarah, Mason said quietly, I need you to understand something. This place exists because your grandfather sacrificed everything for it. His fortune, his privacy, his relationship with his son, even his relationship with you. He could have been a wealthy retiree playing golf and spoiling grandchildren. Instead, he chose to pour his life into saving people the rest of the world had given up on. I thought about my father back in Arlington, probably still going through Grandpa's house, calculating the value of everything he could sell. Dad had always been frustrated by what he called Grandpa's misplaced priorities, his refusal to leverage his military connections for business opportunities, his modest lifestyle despite his military pension and investment portfolio. Now I understood. The money that could have funded a lavish retirement, the connections that could have opened doors in Washington, the time that could have been spent with family. All of it had been redirected here, to this hidden sanctuary in the Virginia mountains. What happens if I can't do this? I asked. What happens if I'm not strong enough to carry this forward? Mason was quiet for a long moment, looking out over the facility that represented decades of her own life's work. Then, 300 veterans who found hope here will have to live with the knowledge that their second chance came from a place that no longer exists. And hundreds more who might have found salvation will never get the opportunity. She turned to face me directly. But I don't think that's going to happen. Your grandfather didn't choose you for this responsibility because you were his only option. He chose you because he saw something in you that maybe you don't see in yourself yet. The weight of decision pressed down on me like the mountain air itself, thin and demanding. I thought about my comfortable life in Arlington, my predictable job, my safe routine. Then I thought about Sergeant David Chen, making jewelry boxes in Montana and teaching teenagers that their hands could create beauty instead of destruction. I need to see the financial records, I said finally. I need to understand exactly what I'm inheriting, what it costs to run this place, how long the money will last. Mason smiled. That's exactly what a responsible commander would say. Come on, let's go back to the house. Your grandfather's office has everything you'll need to make an informed decision. As we walked back down the mountain path, I realized I was already thinking like the person responsible for this place. Not if I would take over, but how. Somewhere between the workshop and the obstacle course, between the photographs of saved lives and the reality of ongoing need, My grandfather's mission had become my own. The question wasn't whether I was ready for this responsibility. The question was whether I could live with myself if I walked away from it. The house felt different when we returned, less like a stranger's home and more like a place where important decisions were made. Mason led me to a study I hadn't seen before, lined with filing cabinets and dominated by a massive oak desk that looked like it had witnessed decades of careful planning. He spent most of his evenings in here, Mason said, settling into a chair across from the desk, reading applications, reviewing case files, planning improvements to the facility. Even after he officially retired from day-to-day operations, he couldn't stop thinking about this place. I sat behind the desk, feeling the weight of his legacy in the smooth grain of the wood, the careful organization of papers, the photographs of veterans whose lives he'd helped rebuild. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a calling that had chosen me as surely as I was choosing it. Outside the window, the lights of the facility glowed steady and warm against the mountain darkness. 18 people were sleeping safely tonight because of what my grandfather had built. Tomorrow, they would wake with purpose, with hope, with the knowledge that someone believed they were worth saving. I opened the first file on the desk, marked Operational Budget 2024, and began to read. The numbers told a story of careful stewardship, of resources stretched to help as many people as possible, of a mission that had survived and thrived for 3 decades through pure determination and love. By morning, I would need to decide whether that story would continue or end with my grandfather's death. But looking around this room, feeling the presence of his life's work in every carefully filed document and thoughtfully planned program, I already knew what my answer would be. Some inheritances come with price tags, others come with purposes. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, you inherit something worth dedicating your life to protect. The financial records painted a picture, both sobering and inspiring. My grandfather had been methodical about everything, including the slow hemorrhaging of his personal fortune into this mountain sanctuary. Spreadsheets dating back 30 years showed the evolution of his commitment from modest initial investments to the complete liquidation of his stock portfolio in 2019. Mason had prepared fresh coffee while I worked through the numbers, and now she sat quietly as I processed what I was seeing. The facility operated on roughly $2 million annually. Staff salaries, utilities, medical supplies, food, maintenance, insurance that costs more than most people's homes because of the liability involved in treating veterans with complex trauma histories. Where did all this money come from? I asked, looking up from a particularly detailed breakdown of construction costs from 2008. Multiple sources over the years, Mason replied. Initially, your grandfather's military pension and investment returns. Later, he sold his house in Arlington and moved to a small apartment, redirecting his housing costs here. He also convinced about 24 other retired officers to contribute regularly, though most of them have passed away now. I flipped to the current year's projections. The numbers were stark. At this burn rate, the endowment runs dry in 18 months. Sooner, probably. Medical costs keep rising, and we've been deferring maintenance on some of the older buildings. The heating system in the dormitory needs complete replacement before winter, and that's a 6-figure expense we don't have budgeted. The magnitude of the challenge was becoming clear. This wasn't just about continuing my grandfather's work. It was about finding sustainable funding for an operation that officially didn't exist. No government grants, no public fundraising, no corporate sponsorships. Everything had to remain invisible to protect the privacy that made the program effective. How did he sleep at night? I wondered aloud, knowing that one bad investment year or medical emergency could shut this whole place down. Mason's expression grew thoughtful. He used to say that some missions don't come with guarantees, only with moral imperatives. The risk of failure didn't excuse the obligation to try. I closed the financial folder and opened another marked Current Residence. 18 files, each containing a story that would break most people's hearts. James Patterson, former Army Ranger, 3 tours in Afghanistan, divorced, unemployed for 2 years before arriving here 6 months ago. Now working as a wilderness guide and engaged to a local teacher. Maria Santos, former Navy corpsman struggling with survivor's guilt after losing her entire medical unit in Iraq. Now training to become a licensed therapist herself. Each file contained photographs showing the transformation, intake photos of hollow-eyed, broken individuals, progress photos documenting physical and emotional healing, graduation photos of people who'd rediscovered their purpose and self-worth. These aren't just success stories, I realized. These are resurrections. That's exactly what your grandfather called them, Mason said softly. He believed that written off didn't mean worthless, that broken didn't mean unrepairable. Sometimes people just needed time and space and genuine care to remember who they were underneath the damage. I thought about my own life, the comfortable routine I'd built in Arlington, marketing campaigns for clients who sold products people didn't need, using psychological manipulation to convince consumers their lives were incomplete without the latest gadget or service. It paid well and required minimal emotional investment, but it had never felt like it mattered. This mattered. The evidence was overwhelming, documented in hundreds of before and after stories, in suicide prevention statistics, in families reunited and careers rebuilt. My grandfather had created something that actually changed lives, that reached people at their lowest point and gave them reason to climb back toward the light. Mason, I said finally, I need to understand the day-to-day operations, not just the numbers, but how this place actually works. If I'm going to take this on, I need to know what I'm committing to. She checked her watch. It's almost 10. Perfect timing for the evening check-in. Would you like to observe? We walked back to the main building, where residents were gathering in what I'd earlier thought was a therapy room. But this felt different, less clinical, and more like a family meeting. 18 men and women arranged in a loose circle, some in wheelchairs, others standing, all focused on a whiteboard where someone had written the day's accomplishments and tomorrow's goals. Who wants to start us off? Mason asked as we took seats near the back. A woman in her 40s raised her hand. I'm Linda, day 67. Today I completed my first solo hike on the intermediate trail without a panic attack. Tomorrow I'm planning to call my daughter for the first time in 8 months. Quiet applause filled the room. No one offered advice or asked probing questions. They simply witnessed her progress and celebrated it. Marcus, day 12, said a young man with prosthetic legs. Today I learned how to operate the mill in the workshop. Tomorrow I want to start designing a project for my nephew's birthday. One by one, each resident shared their daily victory and next day intention. Some accomplishments seemed monumental, like Linda's hike. Others appeared modest, but clearly represented personal breakthroughs. Robert had made eye contact with a stranger for the first time since his injury. Sarah had slept through the night without nightmares. What struck me wasn't the individual stories, though each was powerful in its own way. It was the atmosphere of unconditional support, the way people listened without judgment, the gentle accountability that came from knowing others cared about your progress. This happens every night? I whispered to Mason. She nodded. Your grandfather instituted it during the first year. He said that healing happens in community, not in isolation. People need to know their struggles matter to someone else, and they need to practice articulating their own growth. After the formal check-in ended, residents lingered to talk in smaller groups. Some headed to the workshop for evening projects, others to the library for reading or quiet conversation. The atmosphere was purposeful but relaxed, like a college campus where everyone genuinely cared about each other's success. Sarah, Mason said as we walked back toward the main house, there's something else you need to see before you make your final decision. She led me to a building I hadn't visited yet, smaller than the others and set apart from the main campus. The sign beside the door read Memorial Garden, and I could see through the windows that it was filled with plants and what looked like commemorative plaques. Not everyone makes it, Mason said quietly, unlocking the door. Despite our best efforts, despite all the resources and care and hope, some people arrive here too broken to heal. Some choose to leave before the process is complete. And some... She didn't finish the sentence, but I understood. Inside the memorial garden, 23 plaques were mounted on a stone wall, each bearing a name, dates of service, and date of death. Fresh flowers sat beneath several of them. These are the ones we couldn't save, Mason continued. Your grandfather insisted on honoring them here, so their sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten, and so we'd never become complacent about the life and death nature of what we do. I read the names, feeling the weight of each loss. These weren't statistics or case studies. They were human beings who'd fought for their country and then fought for their lives, losing both battles despite the best efforts of people who cared about them. How do you live with it? I asked, knowing that some people you try to help will die anyway? Mason was quiet for a long moment, touching one of the plaques gently. Your grandfather used to say that you measure success not by perfect outcomes, but by perfect effort. We can't save everyone, but we can make sure that everyone who comes here knows they matter, that their life has value, that someone believes they're worth fighting for. She turned to face me directly. Sarah, if you take over this place, you'll save lives. That's not hyperbole or wishful thinking. It's mathematical certainty based on 30 years of documented results. But you'll also lose some battles, and those losses will break your heart in ways you can't imagine. The question is whether the lives you save justify the pain of the ones you can't. Standing in that memorial garden, surrounded by the names of warriors who'd survived foreign wars only to fall in the battle for their own souls, I felt the full weight of what my grandfather had carried for 3 decades. This wasn't a hobby or charitable interest. It was a sacred mission that demanded everything from the people committed to it. But I also thought about Linda, planning to call her daughter, about Marcus, designing something special for his nephew, about the hundreds of success stories documented in those files, people who'd found hope in these mountains and carried it back into the world to share with others. Mason, I said finally, I want to spend tomorrow talking to current residents, understanding their experiences, learning what makes this place different from other programs they've tried. If I'm going to do this, I need to hear it directly from the people we're trying to help. She smiled, and I could see relief in her expression. That's exactly what your grandfather would have done. He always said that the people we serve are our best teachers about what actually works. As we walked back to the main house, under a sky brilliant with stars invisible from Arlington, I realized that my comfortable old life was already becoming a memory. Whether I officially committed tomorrow or not, something fundamental had shifted inside me. I'd seen what was possible when someone refused to accept that broken meant worthless. When resources and compassion were applied with military precision to the problem of human healing. The financial challenges were daunting, the emotional risks were real, and the responsibility was overwhelming. But for the first time since my grandfather's funeral, I felt like I understood what he'd been trying to teach me all those years when he'd insisted that some things were worth any sacrifice. This was one of those things. And tomorrow, I would begin learning how to carry it forward. Morning came with the kind of mountain silence that makes city dwellers nervous. But I'd slept better than I had in months. The guest room Mason had prepared felt more like home than my apartment back in Arlington, with its view of parking meters and traffic lights. Here, the window opened onto forest that stretched to the horizon, broken only by the careful architecture of hope my grandfather had built into these hills. I found Mason in the kitchen at dawn, already dressed and nursing coffee that could have stripped paint. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent decades making the most of every hour, every resource, every opportunity to make a difference. Sleep well? She asked, pouring me a cup without asking if I wanted one. Better than expected, I admitted. I dreamed about my grandmother, first time in years. She was sitting in that Mustang, telling me to pay attention because the real lesson was just beginning. Mason nodded, like that made perfect sense. Your grandfather always said she had opinions about this place, even after she was gone, claimed he could feel her approval when decisions went right, her disappointment when they didn't. We sat at the kitchen table as sunrise painted the mountains gold, and I asked the question that had kept me awake during the small hours. Mason, what happens if I'm not him? What if I don't have whatever it takes to run this place the way he did? She studied me over her coffee cup, those sharp eyes taking inventory of something I couldn't see. Sarah, your grandfather wasn't born knowing how to save broken veterans. He learned by doing, by failing, by getting back up and trying different approaches until something worked. The first year this place operated, we lost more people than we helped. Nearly shut down twice. That surprised me. The facility I'd seen yesterday had felt so established, so perfectly calibrated to its mission. What changed? He stopped trying to fix people and started trying to understand them, Mason said simply. Stopped imposing solutions and started listening to what the veterans themselves said they needed. Most of our best programs came from suggestions made by residents, not from textbooks or professional consultants. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dormitory where 18 lives were beginning another day of incremental healing. Your grandfather's greatest strength wasn't his military expertise or his financial resources. It was his willingness to admit when he was wrong and adjust course accordingly. That's what made him a good commander, and it's what made this place work. I thought about my own career, built on marketing strategies designed to manipulate consumer behavior, on campaigns that succeeded by exploiting psychological vulnerabilities rather than addressing genuine needs. I've never done anything remotely like this. I sell things to people who don't need them. I wouldn't know where to start. You start by listening, Mason said. Come on, breakfast is communal here, and I want you to hear what these folks have to say about their own experiences. The dining hall buzzed with quiet conversation as residents gathered around tables that could have belonged in any family kitchen. No institutional cafeteria trays or sterile serving lines, just people passing platters of eggs and bacon, pouring coffee for each other, discussing plans for the day with the casual intimacy of extended family. Mason introduced me simply as Colonel Hayes' granddaughter, visiting to learn about the program. No mention of inheritance or future responsibility. Just a family member trying to understand what her grandfather had built. Linda, the woman who'd shared her hiking victory the night before, invited me to sit with her group. Up close, she looked younger than I'd initially thought. Maybe late 30s, with laugh lines that suggested joy had eventually won its war against whatever darkness had brought her here. Your grandfather saved my life, she said matter-of-factly, spreading jam on toast. Not in some abstract therapeutic way. Literally saved it. I was 3 days away from a permanent solution to my problems when I found this place. I nearly choked on my coffee. 3 days away from what? Suicide, she said calmly, like discussing the weather. Had it all planned out, method, timing, even wrote the note. Then a counselor at the VA mentioned this program off the record, said it was unconventional but effective. Figured I had nothing left to lose. Marcus, the young man with prosthetic legs, nodded from across the table. Same story, different details. IED took my legs, but the real damage was up here. He tapped his temple. Couldn't see any future that didn't involve being a burden on everyone who cared about me. This place taught me that losing parts of yourself doesn't mean losing yourself. What makes it different? I asked. What happens here that doesn't happen other places? Time, said an older man named Robert who'd been quiet until now. Other programs have schedules, deadlines, discharge dates, insurance companies and bureaucrats deciding you're healed whether you feel it or not. Here, you stay until you're actually ready to leave. Could be 6 weeks, could be 6 years. Depends on what you need. Linda nodded emphatically. Plus, nobody here thinks they know your story better than you do. Other places, therapists and counselors tell you what your problems are, what caused them, how to fix them. Here, they ask what you think, what you've tried, what you need. Then they help you figure out how to get it. And the work, Marcus added. Real work, meaningful work, not occupational therapy or make-work projects. I'm building furniture that people will use for decades. Linda's designing trail systems that'll help other veterans connect with nature. Everyone contributes something valuable. I thought about the workshop I'd seen, the precision and pride evident in every project. Do you get paid for what you make? Eventually, Robert said. Once you're ready to transition back to civilian life, they help you turn your skills into income. But while you're here, money isn't the point. Purpose is the point. Feeling useful again, feeling capable again. The conversation continued as people finished breakfast and headed to their various activities. Some to the workshop, others to therapy sessions, a few to outdoor projects that utilized the mountain setting. What struck me wasn't just their obvious improvement from whatever state they'd arrived in, but their genuine affection for this place and its mission. They talk about it like family, I said to Mason as we walked toward the medical facility. Because that's what it becomes, she replied. When the outside world has written you off, when your own family doesn't understand what you've been through, when every institution you encounter treats you like a problem to be solved or managed, finding people who see you as a whole human being worth investing in. That creates bonds stronger than blood. We spent the morning observing various programs. Physical therapy that address not just damaged bodies, but damaged self-image. Group counseling sessions where participants talked about nightmares and survivor guilt with people who understood from personal experience. Skills training that ranged from basic computer literacy to advanced manufacturing techniques. But what impressed me most was the subtle integration of mental health support into every activity. The woodworking instructor, who casually checked in on emotional states while teaching joinery techniques. The hiking guide, who used wilderness challenges to build confidence and trust. The cooking classes that doubled as lessons in self-care and nurturing. Your grandfather designed everything here around a simple principle. Mason explained as we watched a therapy session through one-way glass. Healing happens in context, not in isolation. You can't separate someone's mental health from their sense of purpose, their physical capabilities, their social connections, their spiritual beliefs. Traditional programs try to treat symptoms. This place treats whole human beings. By lunch, I'd spoken with more than half the current residents. Their stories varied in details, but followed similar patterns. Military service that ended traumatically, whether through physical injury, psychological trauma, or simply the difficulty of transitioning to civilian life. Years of struggle with systems that didn't understand their needs or constraints that prevented effective treatment. Arrival here as a last resort, often on the verge of giving up entirely. Gradual healing through programs that address their actual rather than their presumed needs. As I stood on that observation platform one final time, watching the sun set over my grandfather's hidden legacy, I understood that some inheritances can't be measured in dollars or square footage. The Mustang in the driveway had been more than transportation. It had been a bridge between the man I thought I knew and the mission that had defined his final decades. Tomorrow, I would resign from my marketing job in Arlington. Next week, I would move my life to these mountains. The financial challenges were real, the emotional weight enormous. But some responsibilities choose you rather than the other way around. My grandfather had spent 40 years proving that broken didn't mean worthless, that the forgotten could be remembered, that hope could take root even in the most damaged soil. The GPS had said, home for a reason. This was where I belonged now, carrying forward work that mattered more than profit margins or promotional campaigns. In these Virginia hills, surrounded by people rebuilding their lives one day at a time, I had finally found my own purpose. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't what someone leaves you. It's what they trust you to carry forward.